The other big wrestling death was Tom Billington, better known to wrestling fans as the Dynamite Kid, one half of the British Bulldogs, who died on his 60th birthday this week. No cause of death has been revealed, although he was in very poor health for a very long time. He revolutionized the wrestling business. You know, words like that get thrown around a lot. Revolutionary, innovative. He was that. You know, he was a small man who did a lot of big things that people took notice of that they had never seen before. He brought this stiff style over with him from, the UK and Japan. And this was at a time when wrestling was still very much a big man's game. Especially when he came to, WWF and he was part of a tag team. He didn't have a singles run there or anything, but it was the land of the giants by and large. Size is still important in wrestling today. Size is still important in WWE, but it's not as important as it used to be. You have a lot more people who are considered to be stars and headliners who were not 6'8", 300 pounds. And he certainly was not 6'8", 300 pounds. Far from it. But I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that he was one of the singular most influential performers in the history of the wrestling business. At least in this country. Just so many different wrestlers that he influenced who came out this week to, pay their respects and had very nice things to say about him and said, oh, he was an influence on me or he got me into the wrestling business. Chris Benoit, I keep thinking of Chris Benoit because it is scary how physically similar the two of them were, right down to the way they wrestled. You could tell how he influenced Benoit as a worker, even right down to the moveset, the snap suplex, the diving headbutt, that just intensity and aggressiveness, in the ring, obviously outside the ring too, unfortunately, but in the ring that Benoit had, that's right out of the Dynamite Kid playbook. And he was ahead of his time. The matches that he had in the late 70s and Stampede in the early 80s with Bret Hart and Tiger Mask, maybe his most famous opponent. The tag team matches with the British Bulldogs against the Hart Foundation in the WWF. It was classic stuff. And, I was thinking about this because people have been talking about all those classics with the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs. We've now lost one half of the Hart Foundation in the last few months and the other half of the British Bulldogs. And so once again, Davey Boy, of course, passed away many years ago. And so once again, Bret Hart is the last man standing here. Bret is the last one left from that Hart Foundation faction, and he is the last one left from those old Hearts and Bulldogs matches. It just reminds me of, I think in his book he talks about it, but Bret has often talked about how crushing it has been for him to lose so many friends of his in the wrestling business. He was good friends with Bryan Adams, who passed away. He was good friends with, Randy Savage, who passed away, Kurt Hennig, who passed away, Rick Rude. Obviously, his brother Owen, Davey Boy, Anvil, and probably many more people as well. Roddy Piper. I mean, think about this. Think about if you go through life, you have all these friends, all of these colleagues and coworkers. The only thing I could compare it to is a soldier on the battlefield who loses men, who loses a lot of his comrades. I mean, think about all the friends that Bret Hart has lost over the years. And it's easy to sometimes say, oh, bitter Bret, and, Bret sounds, like a bitter old ex-wrestler and stuff. And in some ways, he may be. But think about what this guy has gone through just in terms of all the people close to him that he's lost over the year. And other members of his family, too, who have died young. So it's pretty crazy to think about. In a lot of ways with these little groups here, he's the last man standing. But I think the first time I ever saw the suplex over the top rope spot in a match where one guy suplexes the other out over the top, they both go tumbling to the floor, which is a very dangerous spot to do, or at least the earliest version of it I can remember seeing, was in a Bret Hart Dynamite Kid match from Stampede Wrestling that was on one of Bret's DVDs. And I think now they have Stampede on the network as well. But they had ladder matches together, at least one that I can remember, ladder match together in Stampede, which was the earliest ladder match I ever saw. They even had a boxing match. You look up their boxing match in Stampede between Bret Hart and the Dynamite Kid. Those two had some wars long before they ever joined the tag team ranks working for Vince McMahon. Now, as a kid, I was familiar with the British Bulldogs. They were on the roster at that time when I was watching, Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and Ted DiBiase and all those different wrestlers. I liked them, but I can't say they were my favorites, or anything like that. I didn't have any sort of big emotional attachment to the Dynamite Kid the way that other people, I guess, have. I was always more of a Hart Foundation guy and a Demolition guy when it came to the tag teams in the company. But one of the more memorable angles that I do remember from my childhood and my earliest wrestling fandom was Bobby Heenan and the Islanders stealing their dog Matilda. And I just remember the angle they shot. It was on Superstars. This was probably 87 or early 88. And I remember there's a match going on. They leave the ring. The Islanders grab Matilda, who is sitting like on a platform outside the ring. And they and Bobby Heenan haul ass out of the building, and the camera follows them. So you see all three of them, like a great bank heist has just taken place, and they've got $1 million in a bag that they're sort of, carrying out of the arena. And they're hauling ass down this long hallway. And then the Bulldogs eventually come chasing after them, and I remember Davey Boy slipped. So they open the door to the hallway. Davey Boy slips on the floor, falls on his ass, and then Dynamite, because Davey slipped, now Dynamite slips, and he falls. And then they get up, and of course they go after the Islanders out of the building. So that's actually one of the earlier angles I remember from watching Superstars and Wrestling Challenge back in the day. But Dynamite, he juiced himself to the gills. And by his own admission, he just juiced himself up with steroids to no end. And between that and the physical style that he wrestled, it ended up leading to severe physical problems for him. He ended up crippled and in a wheelchair. He felt that without steroids, he would be out of a job. Because, again, he was a smaller guy. He was only about 5'8", which is hard to believe. I'm actually a little bit taller than he was. But he was around 5'8" when Bruce Hart brought him to Calgary. He was only 19 years old when Bruce brought him in there. And Bruce said, look, you got to see this guy. This guy is incredible. He's unbelievable. And he was doing flips and moves that nobody else had ever seen before, at least not in Stampede. And there was a book done on the history of Stampede Wrestling called Pain and Passion. And in the book, it claims that, and I don't know if Dynamite, he may have mentioned this himself in his own book, but I know in that Pain and Passion book, it mentions that the person who first introduced Dynamite to steroids was, of all people, the Junkyard Dog. And this is years before he became the Junkyard Dog in WWE. So anyway, that was his first introduction to, I guess, to the needle. But, Dynamite and Davey Boy were not only tag team partners. They were first cousins. He was estranged from Davey. I don't think they ever made up. I know that Dynamite had, befriended is the right word, but, Davey's kid, Dynamite Kid Jr., he visited Dynamite many times before he passed away in recent years. He visited him, and so I guess Dynamite was cool with Davey's son, but certainly not with Davey himself. I know he took every opportunity, Dynamite did, in his own book to just shit all over Davey Boy Smith. As best as I can tell, and I think this is the reason Dynamite gives in his book, I believe, as best as I can tell, the reason for the bad blood between them is that he and Davey, this was during the time after they had already been out of WWF. So when they left the company, the first time, they were scheduled to enter the All Japan World Tag League tournament. This was either 1990 or 1991. It had to be 90 because Davey wrestled the Warlord at Wrestlemania 7. So 90, he came back to WWE, Davey Boy did, for a singles run. So not only in doing so did he pull out of the World Tag League commitment, which left Dynamite high and dry, he had to go find a new tag team partner. But during his original run in WWE, Davey had trademarked, I guess unbeknownst to Dynamite, he had trademarked the British Bulldog's name, which meant that Dynamite was not allowed to use it. He could not go out on his own or with a new partner and call themselves the British Bulldogs. And so Davey came back to WWE for a singles run, called himself the British Bulldog, and Dynamite was shit out of luck. And I believe that was the primary source of heat between them, which if that's the case, that was a pretty shitty thing for Davey Boy to do. But as great as Dynamite was in the ring, and here I'm talking about this guy as an innovator and all, what a great wrestler he was. You cannot talk about what a great wrestler he was without mentioning his darker side. I saw that his daughter posted a very nice tribute to her dad on Instagram, and how through Facebook a number of years ago she was able to reconnect with him, and she said, for the people who say he was an asshole, not to me. Never to me, she says. And that's good. That's great. I'm happy to hear that. That may well be true. That's not the same. The same cannot be said for others. And the other stuff, I think, should not be ignored. It should not just be swept under the rug because he's dead now and he was a great wrestler, and so let's just say all great things about this guy. I'm sure you've heard at least some of the stories, some of the horror stories when it comes to the Dynamite Kid. How he treated his wife, for example. He would wake her up with a shotgun underneath her chin, telling her one day this will be loaded, which he's admitted to doing. It's not, he did not deny that he did that, at least on one, if not multiple occasions. I guess his argument was, well, there were no shells. I only pretended that there were shells in the shotgun. Wow, what a practical joker he was, huh? So that's one thing. One of the sickest stories. And I was always skeptical about this because it just always sounded too over the top. It just sounded too demented to actually believe that this happened. But Dynamite admitted it. He admitted that it was true. Very matter-of-factly, in fact. If you go on YouTube, there's a trailer for, somebody had started a Kickstarter for him. And it might have been like a mini shoot interview type thing. And in the trailer for this thing from a number of years ago, when he's asked about the story, whether or not it's true, he doesn't deny it. And he says, yep, it was true. And the story is that Dynamite had a friend whose daughter was in a car accident. And the doctors said that her x-rays looked fine. There was really nothing wrong with the girl. Well, the girl's father was very worried. Dynamite's friend was very worried that they might not be able to collect any insurance money. And so he asked Dynamite to do him a favor and break his daughter's legs. And Dynamite did. He took a hammer and he broke the girl's legs. That is not a story that should be ignored. That is a story that people need to be reminded of. It should not be swept under the rug because it's convenient to do so. And there's a bunch of other stuff. I don't need to get into everything here, but that one, above all else, that one really stands out to me. Now, the downfall of Dynamite really, I think, goes back to the back injury, the famous back injury he suffered in late 86. It wasn't any one particular blow to the back. It was just years of abuse in the ring, years of steroid abuse, everything. His body just began to fail him. And the match in particular where his back went out on him, you can actually find footage of it on YouTube, which is unbelievable because this match did not air on television. This was fan cam footage of this random show. Somebody was in the crowd filming this. It was in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada in late 86. And somebody just so happened to be filming this match. It was a tag team title defense. The Bulldogs defending against Don Morocco and Cowboy Bob Orton. And if you watch the footage, Dynamite is in the ring with Orton. Orton drops down. Dynamite jumps over him. Right? He jumps over Orton. And he hits the ropes, and you see Don Morocco on the apron. He delivers a knee to the back. Referee didn't see it. He gives Dynamite a knee to the back. Now, it wasn't a hard knee. Dynamite, though, was already hurt before Morocco even gave him the knee. Now, in his book, Dynamite says that he was in mid-stride. He was in mid-leap, jumping over Orton's body when he felt his back just go out on him. And he just crumpled into a heap. So he was already hurt in midair. Before he even hit the ropes, he was already hurt. And the other wrestlers didn't realize that he was hurt. They were stomping on him. He ended up having to be taken out on a stretcher. Now, for a guy like Dynamite, who was very prideful, I'm sure that was the fact that he would have to be carried out on a stretcher pretty much tells you how severely he was hurt. So now, fast forward a number of months, the company's headed into WrestleMania 3. Dynamite is still not 100%. And the company needs to get the tag team titles off of the Bulldogs because Dynamite is just in such a bad state. Somehow, he wrestled at WrestleMania 3, But anyway, they had to get the belts off of them. Vince McMahon calls up Dynamite. He says, look, I want you to work a television taping and drop the titles to the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Another one who died this year, Nikolai Volkov. And as the story goes, Dynamite refused and said that they would only drop the belts to the Hart Foundation, who they had worked at least dozens, I don't know about hundreds, but dozens of matches with. And were a much, much better choice than Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. So in that instance, Dynamite Kid was a better booker than Vince McMahon. So he said, we'll only drop them to the Hart Foundation. And so if you watch the match, which aired on Superstars, Dynamite never steps foot into the ring. He never even gets up on the apron. They do a deal where Jimmy Hart hits him from behind with the megaphone on the outside of the ring. Davey Boy wrestles the entire match solo, all 3 minutes of it. Dynamite just laid on the floor outside, and referee Danny Davis did the fast count after the heart attack by the Hart Foundation. And Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart won the tag team titles for the very first time that night. And that was really the end of anything meaningful that the Bulldogs as a team ever did in WWE. I mentioned before, some of the horrible things and the horrible stories about Dynamite Kid. His wife was tired of living in fear of what he might do, his destructive behavior. She bought him a one-way ticket. This is the famous story. Bought him a one-way ticket back to the UK and told him, don't come back. Don't ever come back. And he never did. He took the one-way ticket. He flew back to the UK. I think he may have been living with his parents for a while and then got his own flat, I guess you would call it. And that's where he spent the rest of his days. And, there's sad video of Dynamite's final match in 1996. Now, he had retired in 91, but he came back a few years later. He wrestled a handful of matches. I guess he needed the money. In 96, he wrestled in Tokyo. He was in a 6-man tag. He was teaming with Dos Caras, Alberto Del Rio's father. And I didn't know who the other person was. I looked him up. It's this guy, Kuniaki Kobayashi, who I guess was a Japanese junior heavyweight at the time. And on the opposing side was Tiger Mask, right, Dynamite's old rival, Mil Mascaras, and the Great Sasuke. And the video of the match is up on YouTube. It's very sad to watch. Dynamite was clearly off steroids. So the difference in his physique from how you remember him to how he is in this video, he is much small. He looks sickly. He looked like he had some kind of illness. He did not look like the Dynamite Kid. And maybe that just, frankly, proves that his way of thinking was right, in that why he even had to start doing that in the first place. Because if he had an all-natural body, if he looked in 1980 or 1985, let's say 84 when he came to WWF, the way he looked in this video from 96, Vince McMahon would have been like, oh, what are you here to be, an usher? Here to be a ring boy? He would not have had the career that he had. So I get that mindset of why, a lot of those guys probably felt like they had to juice up and do what they did. I'm not condoning it, but the problem is you do it so much, you've got a small body, you juice yourself to the gills to the point where your body can't support it. Why do you think so many wrestlers, we hear about them dying in their 40s and 50s because their heart exploded? Or they do an autopsy and, enlarged heart. Why do you think that is? So looking at him here, it's sad, but you look at him in that video, he's wearing a black vest on his way to the ring. He is a dead ringer in this video for Davey Richards. It's kind of scary. I mean, how similar they look in this video. He should not have been wrestling anymore. He had no business being in that match. That was his last match. I don't believe he ever wrestled again. He had suffered a series of strokes in the last several years, at least 2, if not more than 2. And when he passed away this week, he did so in an assisted living facility. That's where he had been, maybe since the strokes. There was a Satoru Sayama documentary done about 2 years ago. He was Tiger Mask. And of course, as I mentioned before, maybe Dynamite's greatest opponent. And in the documentary, they went searching for the Dynamite Kid. And they found him in the nursing home, basically. Sitting by the window, a complete mess. You can't even understand. He's talking, but you can't even understand what he's saying. Just the saddest sight that you'll ever see. and they put a laptop in front of him with a video of Sayama, who puts the mask on, the tiger mask on, and he starts to rally Dynamite. He's like, Tommy, wake up, Tommy. You know, whatever this guy may have done outside the ring, you see him like that, in that state, and yeah, you know, we all make choices. He made his. He paid the price for it. But it doesn't make it any less sad to see him like that. To see somebody who had all the talent in the world, one of the best at his craft, to see him reduced to being an invalid. Couldn't take care of himself. And he's only in his 50s at the time, because of all the drugs and all the abuse that he put his body through night after night. You know, again, I think that you can reflect back on what a great wrestler the man was. I saw Mick Foley in a blog say that Dynamite would be on his Mount Rushmore. If he had a Mount Rushmore of all-time great wrestlers, Dynamite would be on his Mount Rushmore. But it's also fair to point out how flawed he was as a human being, because that's part of his legacy as well. Like it or not, that is part of the Dynamite Kid legacy. Why was Dynamite Kid such a pariah? Why did he become such an outcast? Because of the things he did and the choices he made. You know, it's like the Ultimate Warrior thing. And WWE whitewashing the history of the Ultimate Warrior, past comments made by the Ultimate Warrior. They build a fucking statue for the guy, and they name an award after him. You would think that the man wrestled with a halo around his head. Not a big fan of the whitewashing. So I think that has to be part of this story here. But there is no denying that, you know, Dynamite Kid was one of the best to ever step in the ring. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the way wrestlers talk about how Ric Flair influenced them when they were young, or Shawn Michaels influenced them and got them into the business, there's going to be a lot of people who say the same thing about the Dynamite Kid.